studies program here. And we are here because we have Professor Bertin M, who is Associate Professor at the University of Kentucky. And by the way, he was our student here. A while back, when I was teaching the course, Introduction to African American Studies, he took my course. And today he is Associate Professor at the University of Kentucky, which tells you one thing, that all of you here, you will be coming back here one day as doctor and so, professor and so at such and such place. So this is why we are here. We are here to make sure that our students learn something, that they become scholars. We are here to train scholars. That's what this graduate program is about. So we are really pleased to have Dr. Lewis here with us. He will be discussing with us, the title is right there, Religion and the Future of Haiti. Before he speaks, let me tell you that Professor Lewis is Associate Professor, as I said, of Anthropology and African American and Africana Studies at Kentucky University. He is the president of the Association of Black Anthropologists. He has been an editor of Conditionally Accepted and is a regular contributor to higher education's higher ed jobs. And his research is, of course, in the growth of Protestant forms of Christianity among Haitians transnationally. And he has published a book with New York University Press. And the title of the book is My Soul is in Haiti, Protestantism in the Haitian Diaspora of the Bahamas. The book was published in 2015. And he has published many other articles in journals, in academic journals, including Wadabagay, a journal of the Caribbean and its diasporas, Studies in Religion / Sciences Religieuses, the Journal of Haitian Studies, the Journal of African American Studies, the International Journal of Africana Studies, Transforming Anthropology, and in the Greenwood Press publication, Multicultural America, an encyclopedia of the newest Americans. And in other publications. He has also been interviewed and has written pieces in newspapers, and his TV appearances include with PBS and many other appearances. And so we are really pleased to have Dr. Bertin Lewis here with us to tell us something about Haiti, religion, and the future of Haiti. See, the problem with Haiti is this. There is nothing probably that one can think of in the Pan-African world, which does not refer directly or indirectly to Haiti. Haiti is the central piece in the Pan-African world. Anyone who does serious studies about Africa, South America, North America, and speaking about the people of African descent, anywhere you look at it, somewhere at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, there is always Haiti. Haiti is that central. Many of you know, in the Caribbean, the process that led to the world we are in today basically involved two events that follow each other. There was colonialism that started when Columbus arrived in that part of the world. And after colonialism, immediately came slavery. So the two events that transformed, that affected the Caribbean, the two events that affected Africa, the two events, and in the case of North America, one of which, slavery, affected African people in North America. All these events, it was Haiti that actually made it possible for us today in scholarship to conceptualize, to say something about slavery, about colonialism, how these two events came together to actually structure that world that we call the Pan-African. Haiti, you know, became independent in 1804. And that was before any other non-Western world became independent. In South America, it was the first country to become independent. But that independence of Haiti did something different from other independence seekers in Africa, in Asia, in South America. Generally, independence came where you fight against the colonial master, you overthrow them, you send them home, you become independent. So it was just a matter of colonialism. Haiti dealt with two events at the same time: colonialism, slavery. And Haiti, by becoming independent in 1804, had to attack these two events at the same time. And so Haiti became central to the Pan-African world. One cannot talk about the Pan-African world without dealing with Haiti. But we do know that after that, many things happened, socially, economically, politically, and Haiti is always in the news. And it becomes very confusing in many ways. And the question is always, what happened to Haiti? What is going on in Haiti? Why is it that Haitians have been fleeing? So there are many, many unanswered questions. And in the academia, we try to answer questions about all this. We try to give answers. And one aspect of it is that Haiti has been discussed always in conjunction with Asian religion. What did Asians bring from Africa? And if they did, how did that contribute to what we know of Haiti? Can that have a relationship with the kind of problems that we know of Haiti? And so one small aspect of it is that religion. And I am personally really pleased that Dr. Lois will try to clarify some of the confusion about that part of the problem. And so please raise your hand and welcome Dr. Lois.
Thank you, Professor Sangpa. I want to thank this is a full circle moment for me. I never thought I'd have Professor Sankbell introducing me, years later at my alma mater. So this really means a lot to me. I want to thank the Africa Initiative. I want to thank Syracuse University's African American Studies Department, for having me. I want to give you a little background about this presentation. So I am a cultural anthropologist by training, but I'm also the son of Haitians who migrated to the United States back in the mid-1960s. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, but it wasn't until I came here to Syracuse University that I was led on a path of formative events to lead me to become an academic, to lead me to become an intellectual. So, second semester of my sophomore year, I had no idea what my major was going to be. I took a lot of different classes, and not too far from me, like right over my right shoulder, is Shaw. That was my dorm. And I had a friend there who said, "Why don't you take this take an anthropology course? See what it's like. It was really cool. Intro to cultural anthropology." And I took her advice, and I ended up liking that course. One thing about that course that was really important to me was when we discussed race and how the professors in that class, I think was still here, Professor Castro, he discussed how race is a social construction, which was really an unusual kind of provocative statement. I ended up doing well in that course, and I declared my anthropology major. So I have my major now. My junior year, one of the classes I take is Caribbean Society Since Independence. Talk about the brilliant Professor Horace Kemp. And the first book we read in that class was The Black Jacobins, about Toussaint Louverture and the San Domingo, as they call it, the Haitian Revolution. And our first assignment was to do a book review, a book summary. And reading that assignment, it's still on the syllabus, isn't it? Yes. You need to jazz up that syllabus. But to understand kind of like the impact that had on me, to learn about this revolution, to learn about what my ancestors did, it really had a deep impact on me. And Haitian Creole said, we say "li frappe fort," that it hit me hard. And I took that opportunity to kind of take what I learned from anthropology, particular cultural anthropology, which has its emphasis on, understanding culture, study of human beings. And its hallmark method, which is participant observation, which sounds exactly what it actually is. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's, you participate in the culture, you observe the culture, and then you let that culture kind of wrap itself around you. You learn more about it that way. Growing up as, as an American kid in a Haitian household, it kind of set me on my path to kind of, develop a Haitian identity outside of the confines of Haiti. So all of this, those two classes had such an important and lasting impact on me. I went on to get my master's degree in anthropology at the New School in the city. And I apologize for those of you from Syracuse, but I'm in New York, and that's always going to be the city. That's what we just refer to, it's the city. And went on to get my PhD at Washington University in St. Louis in anthropology as well. And all those interests, culminated in this moment right now where I'm sitting before you. I was able to publish this book, My Soul is in Haiti. I'll pass this around so people can take a look at that. Protestantism in the Haitian diaspora of the Bahamas. And the lessons I learned in Professor Campbell's class in particular, they stay with me. Being introduced to not only the history of Haitians, but history of and the struggle of people of African descent in the Caribbean and other issues dealing with humanity has really helped guide my life. This issue of Black dehumanization that we see, the normative degradation of Black people on a daily basis that we're familiar with. This was something that was challenged. This was something that was, got me thinking critically, for the first time in my life. It came through a Black studies class. I mean, that's like one of the most important things about Black studies, about showing you, helping you develop a critical thinking about yourself in a different way, in a positive way, and also to see what Black studies can offer as far as solutions, not only to like issues of liberation for Black people, but I think at the moment that we're in as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, this is a crucial moment that we're in right now, and that there's things about Black traditions, African traditions, that could speak to saving, hopefully, and preserving our species. But I'll talk a little bit more about that and other things. But let me just go ahead and get into the talk. I know that's what you came for. So let's just get into it. Okay. So now, as many of you know, back on January 12, 2010, there was a 7.0 earthquake which devastated Port-au-Prince, Léogâne, and other parts of Haiti. It destroyed parts of Haiti's fragile infrastructure, claimed the lives of over 100,000 Haitians, and left over 1 million people homeless. The day after this catastrophe, Reverend Pat Robertson, an influential voice in the American Fundamentalist movement, made the following comments on the 700 Club, a syndicated news show for the Christian Broadcasting Network, which reaches over, at the time, a billion households worldwide. So he said, something happened a long time ago in Haiti, and people might not want to talk about it. They were under the heel of the French, Napoleon III or whatever, and they got together and they swore a pact to the devil. They said, we will serve you if you will get us free from the French. True story. And the devil said, okay, it's a deal. Robertson said that ever since they have been cursed by one thing after the other. And then he contrasted Haiti with its neighbor, the Dominican Republic. An island of Hispaniola is one island. It's cut down the middle. On the one side is Haiti, On the other is the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is prosperous, healthy, full of resorts, etc. Haiti is in desperate poverty. Same island. They need to have, and we need to pray for them, a great turning to God. And out of this tragedy, I'm optimistic something good may come. But right now, we're helping the suffering people, and the suffering is unimaginable. Now, the moment that, like if this was a class, I'd take time to talk to folks and be like, what do you think about this? These comments and things of that nature. But I want to respect your time. I know we're supposed to go to 6. So I'll skip over that part and just get to the answer. The moment which Pat Robertson was referring to in his comments is part of the Haitian national narrative, the Wakaima voodoo ceremony, which launched the Haitian Revolution, which was from 1791 to 1803. So despite the humanitarian efforts of Operation Blessing International, a charitable organization founded by Robertson, assisting Haitians with earthquake relief at the time, Robertson's remarks struck many as callous and racist. But missing in some of these responses to Robertson's remarks in the midst of this tragedy, which include condemnations and historical essays critiquing Robertson's interpretation of Haitian history, is an important reality of the contemporary Haitian religious landscape, which has been neglected and requires analysis. Some Haitian Protestants in particular, also believe that Haiti is cursed due to a pact their ancestors supposedly made with the devil at the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. Now, Protestantism, the Protestant forms of Christianity, Adventist faith, Baptist faith, Nazarene faith, has grown steadily in Haiti within a historical context of revolutionary triumph, poverty, foreign interference, state repression of the Haitian people, and environmental disasters. So, for example, in 1930, 1.5% of the population of Haiti was Protestant. The population of Protestants tripled and then doubled between 1930 and 1950. And by 1977, 20% of the country had converted to some form of Protestant Christianity. And at the turn of the 20th century, we see, 21st century, we see that currently at least, and this is a conservative estimate, a third of Haiti is Protestant. So Haitians convert to different forms of Christianity for numerous reasons. One reason is that conversion provides protection from harm and the misfortune that they associate with voodoo. Some convert as a result of a long-standing illness, while others convert as a way to improve their economic standing because of the opportunities that Protestant churches provide. Others are raised within Haitian Protestant families, churches, and are educated in schools associated with Protestant churches, which help to shape the cultural practices, their cultural practices and their worldviews as well. Additionally, increasing numbers of Haitians, both at home and abroad, practice various forms of Protestant Christianity. So for in the Bahamas, we find a lot of people who migrate to the Bahamas from Haiti, and they either go by plane or by boat. When they go by boat, many of the Haitians that we find in the Bahamas, they come from northern Haiti, from the northern departments, and some of them make a series of boat trips. So there's this island right here is called La Tortue, and it's about 55 miles south of Great Inagua, which is like the furthest island in this archipelagic nation of the Bahamas, which is made up of 700 islands and keys. And then they'll make a series of migrations to whatever island they want to be on. But most of them end up here on the island of New Providence, where you'll find the majority of the Bahamian population there. So Haitians range between 30,000 to 60,000 people within a country of over 400,000. But it appears that Haitians who were traditionally, when they migrated to the Bahamas, were traditionally Catholics, were becoming Protestants or some sort of evangelical. So in a 2005 survey conducted by the International Organization of Migration and in the College of the Bahamas at the time, hundreds of Haitians were interviewed about their religious practices, among other things. And when they asked, what their religious affiliation was, 27.7% responded Catholic, whereas 29.1% replied Anglican, Baptist, or Pentecostal. So in interviews that I conducted with Haitian Protestants back in 2005 on the island of New Providence, that's where I did my research, some of my informants believe that Haiti got its freedom the wrong way because of a voodoo ceremony at Wakaima that launched the Haitian Revolution in 1971. So what happened at Wakaima that would make some Haitians feel that enslaved Africans got their freedom the wrong way? The answer lies in the context and conditions of Saint-Domingue and Haitian Protestant views of voodoo. So just to give you a little synopsis of like the transatlantic slave trade, the one point where it's here in the Western Hemisphere where you have Africans being transported and brought to the the Caribbean, South America, and North America. Africans who survived the rigors of the Middle Passage, they were sold as chattel. And as the big difference between slavery of like in the ancient world and then like this form of slavery that accompanies the formation of capitalism as an economic system is that it becomes chattel slavery, whereas these people who are slaves, they lose their rights as human beings, and they're treated in a manner as in the same manner that you treat property, treat furniture, treat a cow, etc. So once those Africans who survived the Middle Passage survived also the forced march from like the interiors of Africa to the coasts as well. There's a lot of death that happened along the way. Those who survived and reached the plantation, they were assigned slave tutors who showed them how to perform the different tasks that were necessary for the production of crops such as cotton, indigo, and tobacco. So on these plantations, Africans became chattel slaves, okay? So this is like a slave making process we can think about, or as Professor Campbell will refer to it, you look at the labor process, of this. So they became slaves to these different labor processes, force and domination. So as slaves who produce indigo, tobacco, and then this is one spectacular figure that comes out of chattel slavery in Saint-Domingue, which eventually becomes Haiti. And Saint-Domingue was, and Haiti is about the size, roughly the size of the state of Maryland. But at one point, this colony produced 2/5 of the world's sugar and almost half of the world's coffee. And it was common in order to produce these commodities for production in all these different markets, whether it be the North American market or the European market, for example. It was common for slave masters to use violent, coercive mechanisms to maintain plantation labor production processes. So it was not uncommon, as sociologist Alex Dupuy writes, to hang a slave by the ears, mutilate a leg, pull teeth out, gash open one side and pour melted lard into the incision, or mutilate genital organs. Still, others used the torture of live burial, whereby the slave, in the presence of the rest of the slaves who were forced to bear witness, was made to dig their own grave. Women had their sexual parts burned by a smoldering log. Others had hot wax splattered over hands, arms, and backs, or boiling cane syrup poured over their heads. So, all of these heinous acts were committed to force slaves to perform their duties on plantations and enrich white planters. In addition to the physical and psychological violence, Le Code Noir, or the Black Code, prescribed baptism and instruction in the Catholic religion for all enslaved Africans and deemed assemblies of enslaved Africans for purposes other than Catholic worship illegal. However, secret assemblages occurred amongst the slaves where elements of African religions and rites were kept alive through the creation of the religion called Vodou. Formed between 1750 and 1790 on the plantations of Saint-Domingue, Vodou is a Fongbe or Benin term for spirit. As anthropologist Karen Richmond writes, Vodou refers to a genre of ritual music and dance performed in honor of a category of spirit. Spirits are called loi and can be thought of as superhuman beings who are inherited through family lines among land-holding descent groups. Said to be from Guinea or Africa, and to dwell there still, loi they crystallize a deep historical memory of the violence and displacement of the African ancestors past. Reflective of their creolized history, some are based on Catholic saints and many have African names. Now, Vodou played an important role in the struggle for liberation among the enslaved Africans against colonial powers because as anthropologist Leslie Demong, Haitian anthropologist Leslie Demong observes, the rituals of Vodou provided a spirit of kinship that fueled the slaves' revolt against their colonial masters. In the practice of Vodou and the struggle for liberation from the dehumanizing effects of chattel slavery converged during the Bwakaima Vodou Congress in 1791. So this is part of like a Haitian national narrative. I will say that academics, there's some historians, even anthropologists, late anthropologists, Michel Rolfe-Trouillot, contend that like the ceremony it didn't happen, or it was a conflation of two ceremonies that happened around the same time. But when you learn about this within the Haitian educational context, many times it's thought of as a one singular event. So, according to the singular event, this Voodoo Congress was led by Boukman, a Maroon who escaped from a plantation near Montrouge and led a ceremony that was pivotal to the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. The Trinidadian labor historian C.L.R. James notes the importance of this historical moment in a stirring account of the ceremony that occurred in August 1791 in the Black Jacobins. A tropical storm raged with lightning and gusts of wind and heavy showers of rain. There, Boukman gave the last instructions, and after voodoo incantations and the sucking of the blood of a stuck pig, he stimulated his followers by a prayer spoken in Creole, which, like so much spoken on such occasions, has remained. The God who created the sun, which gives us light, who rouses the waves and rules the storm, though hidden in the clouds, he watches us. He sees all that the white man does. The God of the white man inspires us with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. Our God who is good to us orders us to revenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us. Throw away the symbol of the God of the whites, which causes us to weep, and listen to the voices of liberty, which speaks in the hearts of us all. So 6 days later, slaves of the Turpin plantation, led by Boukman, indiscriminately massacred every white man, woman, and child they could find. This began a general insurrection that would lead to the Haitian Revolution, the first successful slave revolt in the Western Hemisphere that extended the rights of man beyond Europeans and articulated common humanity and equality for all Haitian citizens. Now, although the story of Wakaima inspires many Haitians and other people of African descent who share a similar history of bondage, many Haitian Protestants today find the history of Wakaima offensive, and some believe that this was the exact historical moment when Haiti was consecrated to the devil. Thus, Wakaima, by extension, ensured a legacy of misery in Haiti that is evidenced by the underdevelopment that grips it today, and for some lies as a root cause of the January 12, 2010 earthquake. So this interpretation of Wakaima is clearly articulated, for example, by this gentleman here, Chaban Jeune, a pastor and evangelist from Haiti, who's also a former candidate for the Haitian presidency. He was also the catalyst for Haiti for the 3rd century, an interdenominational evangelical organization whose main purpose is to take Haiti back from the devil and dedicate her to Jesus Christ. In an August 6, 2005 interview with Michael Barrett, Pastor Chavan stated that the nation of Haiti had been enmeshed in spiritual bondage because the country was dedicated by a voodoo priest, Boukman, at its liberation, and has been in bondage to the devil for generations. In this interpretation of Wakaima, Haitian Protestants, like Pastor Chavan, view Vodou as a satanic religion, which is responsible for Haiti's underdevelopment, continuing governmental corruption, and endemic poverty. But it's not only Pat Robertson and Chavan Jeune who hold these views with regard to Haitian history. Everyday Haitian Christians in the Bahamas, for example, also believe that Haiti was consecrated to the devil, and that the enduring practice of Vodou is a malediction, a curse on Haiti. So many Haitians who migrate to the Bahamas, they migrate as Protestant Christians, as evangelicals, and their political views cannot be separated from their religious views. In interviews I've conducted with Haitian Protestants in 2005, subjects were asked 2 questions concerning Haiti and its contemporary social situation. The first was, what is your opinion of Haiti's social situation? The second question was, what does Haiti need to change its current social situation? In response to the first question, the majority of respondents from Haiti described the country's situation in overwhelmingly negative terms, viewing no hope for Haiti. When the second question was answered, the majority of respondents referred to God as the only way for Haiti's endemic poverty and political and social instability to stabilize. So what I'm going to do right now is give you an excerpt from like an interview that I had with someone I'll call Sister Maud. I interviewed her on September 6, 2005 in the Bahamas. At the time of our interview, she was 31 years old. She converted to Protestantism in Haiti when she was 13 and then baptized at 17. Unlike the majority of Haitians in the Bahamas who migrate from the northwest state of Haiti, Department Northwest, she was from Port-au-Prince. Before her migration to the Bahamas, she attended l'Église Baptiste Patriarche de Cazo, a charismatic Baptist church in Port-au-Prince. She explained to me how her family was deep into voodoo and listed different family members that had served these different spirits. So in the following interview excerpt, Sister Maud links poverty, underdevelopment, and violence in Haiti directly with the continued practice of voodoo in Haiti. So as part of the general interview schedule I have, so as an ethnographer, you'll have a list of questions that you'll ask your research consultants or your key informants. You'll get before you interview them, you'll get informed consent from them to participate in an interview with them and have them sign a document. Sometimes they'll need to be translated into another language like Haitian Creole or French or whatever language that the person is literate in. So as part of her interview schedule, the list of questions that I would ask all my consultants, I asked her to describe Haiti's socioeconomic situation. She replied, I don't see anything for Haiti. For Haiti to change its current situation, the people have to stop committing crimes, stop the blood from running on the streets, and turn their faces toward God. Turn their faces toward God because the people, the Haitian people, have consecrated the country with the devil. Haitians give Vodou top place in Haitian society. They give it the top place. It's the reason why the country is in the state it's in. You understand what I'm saying? Imagine a person, a little peasant who can't eat but has a goat and is feeding it, fattening it up to give Loa food every year. While this person is fattening the goat, this person has children. This person has who knows how many children they can't send to school. And then this person has to save what they have to give Loa food. What is this person they're giving their food to? They do some, incantations, do some rituals associated with voodoo, and then throws the stuff on the floor. Imagine a person who goes to a sacred tree every year and then rolls around in the mud, a place that's dirty, a place that smells like a place where a pig would roll around. How can you make me understand for the devil? And this is not misery that the devil is creating in the country. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because if you're not a pig, there's no reason for you to be rolling around in the mud. How does someone bathe in dirty water, in mud? This person is not a pig. This is normal for a pig. I think that all of our ignorance, the Haitian people, causes the country to be the state that it's in. For there to be true change in Haiti, there needs to be no less than everyone saying, okay, I renounce all the worthless law, all the worthless saints, all the worthless statues, and we'll turn their faces toward God. And that's what God will have something to say on their behalf. And as long as they continue to give a lot of food, worship sacred trees, make a bunch of faces, the country will never change. Instead of changing, it will get worse. And keep this in mind. She's saying this in 2005. 5 years later, the earthquake happens in this cataclysmic earthquake happens in Haiti. That means the president will never be able to change the country. Only God can change it. So as we can see, Sister Maud believes that Haiti was consecrated to the devil. Through the lens of Haitian Protestantism, she interprets Haiti's crisis as a spiritual crisis that can only be transformed through the catalytic action of the Holy Spirit. She contrasts her religious beliefs with a strong belief in the assumed deleterious effects of voodoo on Haitian citizens. In examples of people who practice voodoo, she believes that this practice encourages wasting one's money and promotes ignorance among Haitians. She also feels that the only true transformation of Haiti into a safer, stable nation state is through the conversion of voodoo practicing Haitian citizens into Protestants. Now, Haitian Protestants, and I'm not saying all of them hold this view, but those who hold this view of voodoo choose to scapegoat the religion instead of looking at other parts of Haitian history that contributed to Haiti's current crisis, such as the multi-million franc indemnity Haiti paid to France beginning in the 19th century so that France would not invade Haiti after the Haitian Revolution. We also can look to the US occupation of Haiti, which happened from 1915 to 1934, as a factor which implemented a system of forced labor that ravaged Haiti's peasant population. There was also a treaty, the Haitian American Treaty in 1915, which gave the United States control of the country's finances. A gendarmerie, an armory control of US citizens, and Haitians was established to protect US business and political interests. There are also parts of the Haitian Constitution that were rewritten in favor of American business interests. And because before in the Haitian Constitution, it was written that the ownership of foreign land was banned, okay, as part of protecting interest, economic interests for Haitians. But then after that was changed, you have the North Haitian Sugar Company that's created, the Haitian Pineapple Company, and they bought up the land of these that the peasants used to work. We can also look to the period when the Duvalier dictatorship, that was between 1957 to 1986, ruled Haiti through fear and violence while siphoning millions of dollars of taxes and international aid for itself. And this is the moment when Haiti got that moniker that so many of us know about, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It was even before, before the Duvalier dictatorship, it was not the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. That was a historical moment that happened during the Duvalier dictatorship. So, in particular, while Jean-Claude Baby Doc, he ruled from 1971 to 1986, and members of his circles grew fabulously rich, the majority of Haitians slipped deeper into poverty. The percentage of the Haitian population living in extreme poverty rose from 48% in 1976 to 81% in 1985. And 1985 was like the year right before Jean-Claude was run out of the country, and he left the country in an American chartered jet in 1986. So, as a scholar who thinks critically, as a student of Professor Campbell, I have problems with this view. I've always had it, never sat right with me. It never sat right with me. I want to take you through to some analysis of this view so we can understand some larger issues. So first, this idea that Haiti's consecrated itself to the devil. Those Haitian Protestants who believe that Haiti is in bondage to the devil, they recast the entire nation of Haiti as a sinful entity that can only be ameliorated through the conversion of people to Protestant forms of Christianity. And this would require folks to reject, obviously, voodoo, but in some cases, depending on the Haitian Protestant or Haitian evangelical, a rejection of Catholicism as well. And these are the majority religions of Haiti, Catholicism, Protestantism, and voodoo. Second, the view held by many Haitian Protestants that Haiti is cursed condemns the slaves responsible for Haiti's liberation, and by extension, their descendants, rather than the slave owners and the institution of slavery itself. And we tend not to think, in classrooms across the nation, in years past and now, when there are discussions about, slavery and chattel slavery and what it was like, many people get uncomfortable about discussing these things. Go back to the list of human rights abuses and violations that I went over earlier that happened as a result of chattel slavery. When we think about these things and they make us uncomfortable, people are like, okay, slavery was a sin, it was terrible, but let's move on no, we need to talk about what actually happened, and not only just the violence, but what the results of the violence and all the extraction and the economic exploitation that happened, and how that plays itself out in the present. One of the most important lessons that I learned in classes I took with Professor Sang-Pham and Professor Campbell and others was that the past helps to shape the present easily. It does. It absolutely does. And you have to go to the past in order to understand these things. So the problematic view of Haitian history suggests that slavery in Saint-Domingue was a benign institution, or at least it did not in fact merit the slaves' revolt. Third, the revisionist history of Haiti is complicit in its own oppression, downplays the role Black people played in making the Haitian Revolution a successful slave revolution in history. As Haitian studies scholars Charles Arthur and Michael Dash write, over the course of an epic 12-year struggle, the slaves defeated the local whites, the forces of the French crown, a Spanish invasion, a British invasion, and the massive expeditionary force sent by Napoleon Bonaparte, with immense credit for these victories being due to Toussaint Louverture, the man who quickly emerged as the leader of the Black armies. So by viewing Wakaimo as a satanic pact which doomed modern Haiti and mires contemporary Haiti in human misery, the Haitian Revolution as a victory against the dehumanizing effects of chattel slavery are erased. And white supremacy in particular is naturalized. It's also made triumphant precisely because it goes unanalyzed and unquestioned. So the humanity of modern Haitians then cannot be reconciled through pride in the revolutionary roots of Haitian history, which is based on some supposedly Faustian pact with the devil, according to the worldview of Haitian Protestants. The humanity of modern humans modern Haitians can only be reconciled by the blood of Jesus. So in other words, Haitians who practice Vodou must converti. They must convert, become a Protestant Christian, a Christian who rejects and protests aspects of their country's Africanized history and culture, and makes a radical break from their African past to become part of a religious project which has as its ultimate goal the rehabilitation of a nation. So the Haitian Protestant critique of Wakaimo, one of the most important moments in Haitian history then, is not solely a historical and fundamentalist. Rather, it's a reinterpretation of Haitian history which rejects its African roots and which has as its goal to reintegrate Haiti as a respected nation among nations through a global Christian identity. It relies on erasing the roles of whites in the creation of a dehumanizing socioeconomic system based on extraction and violence, and blaming Blacks in their search for a solution to their bondage. But finally, folks, the most important aspect of the Haitian Revolution that is silenced in the belief that Haiti is cursed is that the Haitian Revolution demonstrated that Black people, Africans, people of African descent have a right to live a life of dignity. They have a right to lead dignified lives. This is a struggle that Haitians and other people of African descent are clearly still engaged in throughout the globe. The Middle Passage, where millions of Africans died in transport to the New World, centuries of chattel slavery. When we think about chattel slavery, it makes a lot of us uncomfortable. It makes a lot of people, Black, white, whatever, uncomfortable. But people don't understand that it wasn't like a short period of time. It was centuries. It wasn't a day. It wasn't a week. It wasn't a month. It wasn't a year. It wasn't a decade. It wasn't just even one century. It was centuries. It was centuries. So think about that list of human rights abuses that I talked about earlier, right? From the historical context, happening on a daily basis. Add to that what happened on slave ships. The psychological violence of being cargo, being in a hold for days, weeks on end, people running across the ship's board, jumping off for freedom. Every now and then, the more that I learn about like the Middle Passage and about chattel slavery, I wouldn't say I'm inured to like the violence and stuff, but every now and then I read something that just shocks me. Do you know that sharks used to follow some of these ships. Sharks would follow these ships because human beings would jump over the sides of these ships and they would feed on, the sharks would feed on them. This is it. And I want you to think about how this became mundane, how this became everyday. If you want to understand what the foundations of anti-Blackness, you have to go to this moment right here. This moment right here is the foundation of anti-Blackness, okay? And I'm just telling you, offering one case study and then also showing you some other ways how power works negatively. But this thing right here, people of African descent are human beings with the right to live dignified lives. This is important. So centuries of chattel slavery, the subsequent psychological and physical violence occurring on plantations tried to disprove the fundamental humanity of the Black people who fought for their right to live free and dignified lives. So now here in 2022, people in Haiti, they suffer from at least 3 forms of violence that violate their human rights. They suffer from physical violence, symbolic violence, and structural violence. Haitians experience physical violence through attacks from the Haitian state while protesting governmental corruption. So previously in the Moïse administration, also the current leadership with the interim president, Ariel Henry. I don't know if people have been paying attention to the news coming out of Haiti, but for a couple of weeks now, Haitian garment workers, some of the poorest, some of the lowest paid garment workers in the world have been striking. They've been striking because they want to raise in their wages. And recently it's been, a lot of these protests have been suppressed by the Haitian state. Recently with the government shooting, or the state, opening gunfire on protesters, killing 1 journalist recently, and wounding 4 or 5 other people. But it's not just the Haitian state. We can also look to the United Nations occupying force that reintroduced cholera to Haiti, that sickened close to 1 million Haitians and killed close to 10,000 of them. And the United Nations is supposed to be a human rights, an international human rights organization. Where do Haitians fit into that? The UN has not been made to even pay restitution to Haitians for this. Haitians are subjected to symbolic violence for how the country is negatively portrayed in the press on a consistent basis. When we think about, when we learn about Haiti in the news, it appears in the news usually as a negative news item, right? That it has purposes. When Haiti appears in the news, it is to fit into Western media depictions of Black violence, Black incompetence, Black instability, and Black pathology. Additional forms of symbolic violence coming from the influx of American missionaries that descended on Haiti in the wake of the 2010 earthquake. Africana studies scholar Celestina Joseph writes that the number of American evangelical missionaries escalating following the earthquake of January 2010 had devastated Haiti, giving the evangelical narrative that the earthquake was a punishment by God. Haitians also suffer from structural violence due to poverty, governmental corruption, and external globalization forces such as the International Monetary Fund that create in-country austerity conditions and exacerbate pre-existing poverty. All of these egregious forms of violence coalesce to create a potent form of anti-Black violence, which violates the basic human rights of Haitians as outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It also continues the theme of anti-Black violence, which began with the situation of their ancestors, who struggled to end the normative violence associated with plantation slavery. So, what would a dignified life look for a Haitian in this context? What would a life of dignity look like? It would include things like gainful employment, earning a living wage for the work that they do. And if you think about it, poverty wages are part of the reason that spurs international migration of Haitians and spurs international migration of other people, other human beings around the world. Being educated in their mother tongue, being educated in Haitian Creole, that would ensure a life of dignity. Access to clean water, having the perpetrators of the cholera epidemic, MINUSTA, brought to justice, access to healthcare. These are all things that human beings need to live. But it's evident that Haitians are treated in a subhuman way. So combating this view that Haiti is cursed requires placing it in its proper historical context, which reveals larger issues of Eurocentric colonization and globalized capitalist structural inequality, particularly played by the United States and the France, forces that prevent Haiti and the peoples of African descent from living dignified lives in the 21st century. Thank you. I would also recommend that folks continue to do more reading. So one of the things that I learned out of, my Black Studies experience here at Syracuse University is that, you need to continue reading and learning more about the world continually. When you get your degrees and leave here, you need to continue to read. Your education does not end when you get your bachelor's degree, all right, or your master's degree or your PhD. You need to continually read from different trusted news sources. And this is important. We're living in an age of great disinformation now, right? During the Trump administration, when one of his, I think one of his spokespersons or aides, Kellyanne Conway, used the term alternative facts. She used the term alternative facts to refer to, whatever information that the Trump administration was putting out at the time. It was a very dangerous phrase that she used, because this idea of alternative facts, what's the truth at that point? So it's very important to learn more about these issues. And a couple of older articles you can find on the web and recent ones I would recommend is something that I wrote called Celebrating Revolutionary Blackness, Haitian Flag Day. You'll find it at this link. This article right here, A Different Fight for 15, Haiti Garment Industry Workers Strike by Mamira Duje Prosper. That came out a day or two ago. This article right here, Why Haiti Advocacy Needs New Strategies by Mark Schuler, that came out on the 2nd of March. I also wrote this article here, Haiti's Continued Struggle for Human Rights. And then my colleague and president-elect of the Association of Black Anthropologists, Jemima Pierre, wrote Haiti, Black Despots and White Rulers for the Black Agenda Report not too long ago. So education should be a constant, ongoing thing in your lives. You have to learn about these things so you can be not only a better citizen, but just to be informed. And regardless of whatever your disciplinary background is, whether you're like an English major, African American studies, physics, all of you are being trained to become intellectuals. And the hallmark of intellectualism is resistance to simplistic answers, right? This resistance to simplistic answers and also critical thinking. You should learn these in your classes. The best examples that I got of critical thinking and thinking in a constellational manner. Thinking in a manner where you connect the dots and see the larger shapes and larger structures and larger patterns that produce some of the social dynamics that we see in the world today. Very important, okay? It's very important to do that. I'd like to thank Professor Campbell, Africa Initiative, and the Department of African American Studies for having me. And I guess we can open up to questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Royce. First, I need probably to ask everyone, is it possible, because I know that Regina was waiting for you to be served or to eat your food, so you could go serve yourself first and then come back for questions. Is that feasible? Okay, so serve yourself and then come back. We will deal with question and answer.
Is that okay with you, Bert?
I mean, if some people, they want to get some food, that's fine, but if anybody wants to ask some questions now, let's go. Let's ask some questions, let's go. Yes,
There's a question on Zoom, maybe I can start off with that.
okay.
Okay, so Perez wrote, I would be interested in hearing Dr. Lewis's perspective on the construct that is referred to as Satan or the devil, as it is connected to Haiti and its spiritual history, and also as it is connected to contemporary spiritual practices among African Americans and Afro-Caribbean. I am particularly interested in the psychological underpinnings of this construct and how it can be linked to white supremacy, colonialism, and the pathologizing of African spirituality.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You know, that's a great question. I think that person who sent that question, I think they answered the question themselves. No, because the idea of the devil or Satan and anything that's demonized that comes out of African traditions or New World African traditions or African descended traditions is essentially a reflection of the logics of white supremacy. It's the logic of white supremacy distorts actual events. It distorts actual practices and concepts and things of that nature. I mean, we can take a, we can look at like the whole furor in the United States over critical race theory, right? If we look at critical race theory, we know that critical race theory comes out of a certain tradition, comes out of the Africana studies tradition. It comes out of a legal tradition here in the United States, which talks about how like, institutions are essentially racist. But is this being taught in K through 12? I mean, you have to get to like law school or get to like college or have like some advanced, maybe an advanced placement class to be introduced to the critical race theory. So critical race theory through white supremacy, through white supremacists, through white supremacists distort that version, that image of I think an important legal theory. So when it comes to like African spirituality, and a sub theme of this presentation is that you see how Black people can internalize anti-Black ideas, right? We can internalize anti-Black ideas and reproduce them, and we know this. We know this with other examples, such as how we reinforce colorism, for example, within our communities, or how we consider. I think in this example of in this case study or in this presentation, you can see that there is an impetus for these Protestant Christians to live a life of dignity as well. But the way that they choose about or think about living a life of dignity, and also their critique of Haitian citizenship as well, what it fundamentally means to be a Haitian, is problematic. They too themselves castigate people who practice voodoo, or they serve law, whatever it may be. And in doing so, we see that they're making a critique of the comportment, of the behaviors, of the actions of their fellow Haitian citizens. But yeah, I think that the person who constructed that brilliant question, I think they pretty much answered it. It's really tied to colonialism, educational practices which reinforce these ideas that people of African descent practice quote unquote savage and unholy forms of religion, and those stereotypes they serve a purpose. They serve the purpose to be able to control a population, extract labor from them, exploit them. So that's my answer.
Could I make a suggestion to just go along with what Professor Sang said? Because Professor Sang was considering the work outside. Could I suggest that?
Oh, the workers?
No, just that one person goes out and we continue discussion. When that one person comes back, another person goes out, so that we can continue this discussion, and some people we can continue eating here.
Okay,
So that,
That's fine. That's fine.
so you can, yeah. But so leave the door open and then one person, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's fine.
So I think yeah, just small, because I think the discussion is going to be so rich, you know.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Steinbrand.
There's a follow-up question also.
Okay.
So Dr. Julie has said, I'd like to pose a follow-up question. Are there resistances against these negative representations among Haitians? Is there an internal debate about this?
That's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Julie. There's internal debate about this depending on the location. You know, there's the internal debates, I think, within Haiti, within the Haitian diaspora, like in the Bahamas and New York, you know, here in the United States, Florida, wherever you find, you know, Haitians practicing Protestant forms of Christianity. They have these debates, you know, and I think it's important to have these debates just because people of Haitian descent, they need to work out the ways in which that, you know, these ideas get circulated and they become implanted in folks and what they do with those ideas as well. I think the debates are important. I'm not sure, well, I was in the Bahamas, I wasn't aware of debates of this happening, like across, you know, folks who practice different forms of Christianity, whether they were Catholics or if they were, you know, evangelicals, or if they were, you know, Vodou practitioners. Especially in the Bahamas, you know, Vodou is just so highly stigmatized. It's highly stigmatized amongst Bahamians who are, you know, which is a holy Christian nation. They pride themselves on being Christian. So yes, there are internal debates which occur. Yes.
I just want to thank you, Doctor, on everything you just said, but kind of going off your last point, and something we talked about in my politics Africa class with Professor Horace, it's like, kind of we were talking about the water god in Nigeria, right? And someone in class said something about witchcraft when it comes to that water god, right?
Mhm.
And especially because the way now that voodoo is seen in Haiti, like it's so negative, has stigma, and that older practices in Haiti is seen as negative, and it had to do so much with religion, and it was tied in with voodoo. How do like now do they reclaim that kind of old culture when it's seen so negatively? Like, what steps would like Haitians use to move forward to like reclaim that old culture, and especially like, you know, you're talking about the native tongue, which is Haitian Creole. Like a lot of the words in there, if I remember correctly, I don't want to get on that tangent, but how do you reclaim that old culture when it has to do so much religion that's frowned upon? Essentially, is what my question was.
Yeah, I mean, that's another good question. I mean, it's like, I mean, there are people who still practice, you know, all these different religious practices. And as a person who wanted to learn about their own heritage more, I use, you know, education here, you know, Syracuse as a way to like put me on that path to do so. But as far as, you know, accessing those, the previous access or practicing, you know, Vodou or learning more about Haitian culture and things of that nature. I mean, you can travel if when possible, and you don't even have to travel necessarily to Haiti to do so. You know, and find and link up with people to learn more about it. There are right now, there are, you know, several institutions, for example, such as Duke University, Vanderbilt. I think the University of Buffalo also, they have Haitian Creole programs that people can learn at. FIU as well, Florida International University. And just, I mean, just to think critically about it.
Probably have a negative view on it though. Like those religious people who have a very negative view on like voodoo and all that. How would they like that cultural shock to them? How could that be changed?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I don't know if you can necessarily have a conversation about that because, I mean, you can have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah.
But it's still gonna have, you know, it's hard to change their perspective if their worldview, filters these beliefs, they're filtering their beliefs to this worldview that requires, that is stigmatized, these religious practices for so long. I mean, it's challenging. I mean, I come from, if you look at that book, the book that I wrote, this is part of my tradition. Haitian Protestantism is part of my tradition. Those are my mom's side of the family. It's an important tradition in trying to understand how different types of Haitians have different ideas about what it means to lead a life, a safe life, a life of dignity, a life of prosperity outside the confines of Haiti, or within Haiti as well. So I don't know. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I don't know. It really depends on on the individuals and what they're interested in learning and what they're open to as well. But I will say that I came across a lot of closed-mindedness that came as a result of trying to be devout Christians as a result. I don't know who had their hand up first. Was it you? Or you can go ahead, and then we'll go to you.
Oh, well, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I don't have as much of a question, it's more of a response to your question. I do want to say thank you, and I see Dr. Campbell's class shining in your presentation with some of the language used. And to that point,
labor process. Dignities.
Yes, and to that point, I wanted to talk about dignity a little bit. In the sense of your comment, I would say that's a very dangerous conversation to have with some people, and I think that it is important to reach out, but I think dignity, the way we're talking about it, means it doesn't mean you have to do exactly what I do. And it could seem selfish to say that, oh, I'm not going to try to have this conversation, because it is important to talk to other people. But I would say to remember to put yourself first, in the sense of that, one, ask who is telling you that this thing is bad. Why would they tell you that, and what ramifications does that have? So I would just think a lot about, especially that last slide, with what does human dignity really mean?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Haitian American Student Association here. It's such a blessing to have you. But my question revolves around Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism. It seems that there's a great distinction between Protestantism and Judaism. Where does the Catholic faith, where is that in this discussion? And personally, it seems that Catholicism is the mediator between the two, between Judaism and being Protestant. So can you explain maybe to why that is?
Yeah, so you have this big religious triangle for Haitians, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Vodou. And those are the major religions that Haitians practice in Haiti and also in diasporic context. Now, Catholicism, at one point in Haitian history became like, the religion of the state, of the Haitian state, and they also had their campaigns to try to eradicate voodoo, the practice of voodoo amongst like the working class and the Haitian peasantry as well. So while voodoo is a syncretic religion, meaning that it mixes aspects of certain types of beliefs, like Amerindian beliefs, African beliefs, and also European beliefs. And remember, it was created like on plantations. So it was created on plantations. So it's created, during the context of the plantation and all the types of labor processes and violence and things that happen on plantations. So voodoo, it borrowed certain aspects of Catholicism to kind of represent itself. So you could have an enslaved African praying to the statue of St. Patrick, for example. but that statue of St. Patrick represents, Dambala or someone that you see in like the Voodoo pantheon, to kind of, cloak, their practices. It's kind of a reflection of what enslaved Africans had, kind of having a mind for themselves and a mind for their master, performing in certain ways, to, kind of exist and coexist, within the plantation context. But Catholicism, there's also, Haitians who just strictly don't mix any voodoo practices with their practice of Catholicism. They refer to them as Catholic Fouan. For example, the strict Catholics. So Catholicism isn't necessarily a mediator. It's something that served as a religion that served as like, partly as a state religion, but also as a religion that was drawn from to practice, another hybrid religion that reflected African beliefs for New World conditions. But it also still has like a lot of antagonism toward voodoo practitioners as well. Although more sympathies towards people who practice, voodoo, as opposed to evangelicals, who are just like, no, this is, we have a strict, there needs to be a strict demarcation line between, it's an either or situation, not like, a chance for hybridity. Although there might be, folks who do switch between the two religions or do practice, those hybrid forms of maybe evangelicalism and voodoo. I don't, I'm not sure. At the end of My Soul is in Haiti, in the final chapter, I write that like there needs to be more ethnographic studies, more historical studies of Haitian Protestantism. Because if you look at the ethnographic record, if you look at like academic studies and religious studies, anthropology, and other disciplines about Haitian religious practices, it's either about Catholicism or voodoo. And it's important to understand more about, understand a lot about voodoo because it's something that's been denigrated. It's something that's been denigrated, obviously here, like in the United States, for example, it's something that's attached to this idea of being, of devil worship, of being satanic, etc. That needs to be done, but there also needs to be done. So in writing that book, I'm trying to figure out, what are the political inclinations of people who practice, who are Haitian evangelicals? Where do they fall on the political spectrum? Are they on the right, on the far right? Is there a Protestant left among Haitians? I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it yet at all, but it might be out there. And I'm asking other people to do the studies as well and study other contexts so we can learn more about that. So we get a sense of like, what the religious landscape is, and then what are the implications of that religious landscape? Yes.
Okay, what's up? My question is regarding, so you already talked about how they can move forward, like some of the things that they would need, like, raising the pay, and things like that, but what do you think the main sole focus should be in order for Haiti to move forward? Should it be emancipation of the people themselves first, and then that kind of going up the ladder to the social hierarchy? Or do you think it should be more of like a government level, being emancipated first, and then have, going down that ladder?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. So what we see in Haiti today is a result of a lot of external and internal forces. I talked a lot about external forces like American occupation, and I talked about internal forces such as the Duvalier dictatorship and what they did to Haiti. But there are other factors within Haiti as well that kind of keep it in the state it's in. I haven't even mentioned anything about like the Haitian oligarchy. There's like a light-skinned class of Haitians, some of them of Lebanese descent and other forms of descent, who control like a lot of the wealth within the country. They're referred to, if you Google like Haiti Bam Bam oligarchy, you'll find the list and names of some of these folks who, for example, own the factories where these that make garments, for example, for international suppliers. But there are a lot of forces, external forces also that are blocking Haiti's path to like democratic, Haiti's path to like, a true democracy and sovereignty. And that's a system that's like, essentially built and maintained by essentially a group of white nations and white institutions, like United Nations, like United States, France. Also there's also a core group from Brazil that includes special reps from the UN Secretary General, the Organization of American States, ambassadors from Brazil, Canada, France, Spain, the European Union, and they appointed themselves as arbiters of Haitian politics, and they interfere in Haitian politics routinely. So I mean, it's a difficult question to answer. What can lead to like, Haiti being like a more safer, stable nation state? Because if you think about it, I don't know if there's folks here from like other parts of like, the Caribbean, but other parts of the Caribbean, for example, they'll see that so much of Haiti's politics are determined by what happens in Washington, that they don't want that type of interference in their own governance. And, so they take steps to like distance themselves from Haitians, distance themselves from Haiti. In the case of, even though you have this, this greater African diaspora throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, when they're in relation to Haitians, if you put like a Bahamian and a Haitian together, the Bahamian is like, I'm not that kind of black. There's a certain type of stigmatized blackness that comes along with being Haitian. So I mean, it's really difficult to say. I mean, other than armed revolt, I mean, I don't see how that could be resolved without having so many actors that are involved in Haitian politics and Haitian society to kind of bring that about. It's difficult to say. I think he had a question, and then I can go to you. Oh, no, then you had your hand up back there too.
It's a Zoom question, kind of segues into what you just said.
Can we have him go first, and then we'll go with you, and then we can go with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just want to start by thanking you for speaking to us. I was also born, well, you didn't say you were from Haiti, but I was born in Haiti. I was born and raised here for like 7 years. So it was pretty cool to hear this talk. But the question that I have is kind of a two-part question. The first question being, you mentioned that 1/3 of Haiti is Protestant. Can you identify or tell us the percentages of the other religions that other Haitians believe in, like that 1/3?
That's a good question. So if I said 1/3 of Haiti is Protestant, probably publicly, if like people were answering a survey, the remaining percentage would say Catholic. But then there are other people who be like, 100% of Haiti is practices Vodou, which is not necessarily true, but that speaks volumes still about what religious affiliation Haitians have, and then also the stigma associated with practicing or serving Loa as well. But that was an older study. I was in Haiti in 2016. And then according to one Haitian religious studies scholar there, he thought that like a percentage of Haitians practicing Protestant forms of Christianity was more like closer to almost half of the country, And another interesting thing he said was that like Catholics, people in Haiti are usually not, Catholics. Some of them are strict practicing Catholics. Some of them are nominal Catholics. They're just Catholic in name. And amongst the people that I did my research, they consider Catholicism to be. Some of them consider them to be Christians. Some of them other folks just consider them to be morally loose people, who essentially, it's just a name that doesn't really mean much. According to this scholar, he told me that to be a Baptist now in Haiti is almost the same thing as being a Catholic. which says some interesting things about what it means to be an evangelical. Now, it's not necessarily the strict form of religious devotion that it was considered to be in previous years. But now it has like maybe a more flexible type of practice of Protestant Christianity. I'm not sure.
Can I follow up where you want?
No, go ahead.
Alright, so follow-up is, do you believe that religion has an impact on the country's overall structure and its people? You did mention that, there are certain strategies that are in place to control the population.
Mhm.
We see that in like, I want to say, well, during the Atlantic slave trade where, a lot of Black societies were converting to Catholicism. So my question is, do you believe that religion do have an impact on Haiti's structure and its overall people?
I really believe that religious practice for Haitians is really important. It's central to who they are as a people, whether it be within the context of Haiti or outside of its borders. I think it's related to this issue of dignity. That people are trying to find a way to feel worthiness by coming from a country that's highly stigmatized. One of the things that I'm working on now is a book manuscript with a graduate of this program, Dr. Charmaine Perry. It's tentatively titled Anti-Haitianism in Paradise, Marginalization, Stigma, and Anti-Blackness in the Bahamas. And just using the Bahamas as a case study and taking the model of anti-Haitianism that we see in the Dominican Republic, almost being replicated within the Bahamian context, we see that the Haitian populations of the Dominican Republic, of the Bahamas, to some extent the United States as well, they're just highly stigmatized. They're highly stigmatized amongst other Black people, other Black descended populations, other African descended populations. And trying to live a life when there's an incessant assault on your being, an incessant assault on your identity is very challenging. Is very challenging. And so you find, so as human beings, we try to find tools and ways to feel worthy, and religion gives us that feeling of worthiness. If we're all, as an evangelical Christian, if we're all the same before, in the eyes of God, that equalizes you. Those beliefs equalizes you, puts you on a spiritual playing field, which makes you consider that you're able to do something, and you can sit with your back straight and your spine straight, and believe that you can do things in this way, right? So it's crucial for Haitians who tend to be highly religious folks who practice whatever religion they do practice, to do those things. I have a chapter in a new publication from Duke University Press titled Embodying Black Religions. One of the co-editors, Dr. Jeanette Julie, she's on the Zoom call. It talks about embodied worship in the Haitian Protestant church. And for kids of Haitian descent in the Bahamas, there's an incessant assault on their identity. They go through so many social deaths during the course of a day of just being humiliated or being treated like, being Haitian is like the worst thing that could be possibly be. It completely resonates with me with like the way I grew up in Staten Island, growing up in like this like working class area of Staten Island where like you have these white kids who are of Italian descent, Jewish descent, Irish descent, who are trying to stake their claim to whiteness, through their anti-Blackness and through their anti-Black practices towards me, my sister, my brother. on a daily basis, So I completely identify with these kids, and I understand why they are so, at times, so devoted to practicing, and trying to become a better Christian, not just because of the way that they're treated in Bahamian society, but also for like an eventual Bahamian identity. Because some of them do end up getting citizenship there. But one thing I didn't even mention in this talk, but if you read my other work, many of them are end up being stateless within the Bahamas. They have a Haitian nationality, but they have no rights as a Bahamian citizen. The citizens, the rights that are accorded to a citizen of the Bahamas, such as like opening up a bank account, being able to attend certain institutions without paying foreigner fees, for example. And then also, just all the regular indignities that come along with being Haitian. I have one person that I interviewed, and this is why religion is important. I have one person who I had interviewed. I have countless stories for the field. One person I interviewed when he was going to maybe secondary school. There was this one tree that all the Haitian kids used to congregate around that ended up being known as a Haitian tree. It was a Haitian tree. And like he would never hang out there, even though he was Haitian, fluent in Haitian Creole. But he was one of the cool kids. So he didn't want to be that stigma attached to him and hanging around that tree to get the teasing, to get the constant barrage of like, discriminatory comments that were usually made to him. So that's why religion, becomes important, because these kids are trying to, at least in the Bahamian context, they're trying to negotiate their identities in within a country that rejects them. But if you don't even know their surname, you wouldn't know that they were of Haitian descent, because culturally they've been cultivated in Bahamian institutions like schools, for example. They speak the way a Bahamian does, dress in the same way, they're still Bahamian, but one has like a last name of Baptiste or Santilien or Louis or Jean-Baptiste or whatever it may be, and then boom, you one of them, that's what it comes down. Yes. You have a question or like?
I want to make some comments.
Okay.
So I want to break the flow a bit. I want to make comments, because first, I want to thank Professor Sankra for steadfast support, and I want to make a correction to the invitation to you.
Okay.
This is a Pan-African graduate study seminar, so we were hoping that you will make some comments about your research process and the work you do as a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that because you've been communicating with me and the department and it went out on the Africa Initiative thing, that there's a Pan-African Studies graduate program. This is part of our graduate program of the department.
Right.
I just wanted to correct that, because Professor Sankman is the director of the graduate program, and without his support, we could not have had this event. So I just wanted that to be there for the record.
Okay.
And if I may, I want to make some other comments. First of all, I was very moved by the way you were moved to come back to your department, because it told me that you were not made of stone and that you're a human being.
Right.
And for the students who are here, I want you to know that this department is the voodoo department of the university.
And what do you mean by the voodoo department?
By that I mean the department that is stigmatized, their students are told not to go to, and white supremacist ideas distort the history. For example, let's take you for example. Remember when we were discussing last night?
Mm-hmm.
You were saying after you took the Caribbean Studies course in this department, you were active leader in SAS. You're an active leader in Caribbean students. You're active leader in Haitian students. And you're active across the campus. Now they want to segment and distort the history of students like yourself. So you went in the study abroad. We don't have any study abroad anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the leadership in intellectual circles. So when you told a story about the sharks following the ship, I grew up learning about the sharks following the ship because there were so many dead bodies.
Mm.
So I want to say that the question you raised about Haiti, and I want you to add one more thing that you haven't added here, that you told me last night. That more Haitians have been deported under the Biden administration than under all three previous presidents. And it's only in a department like this that you're going to learn and organize those things. So I would want you to comment on that, because they want to keep Black and Haitian students out of our department. They don't come here anymore. We used to, the Caribbean Student Societies course at YouTube.
Yeah.
The professor who used to teach that, for 6 years, they haven't replaced them. That's why we don't have Haitian students coming in this department anymore. So I just want to make that comment. And they're bringing people here to lead the department, to say that it's like Pat Robertson said about this department is the kind of leadership they want to bring into this department.
Well, first of all, thank you, Professor Sangpao. I'm sorry I didn't mention you before.
No,
Thanks to the
Pan-African studies.
Pan-African Studies program as well here that produces, fine MA students as well. So let me address a comment about Biden, about the Biden administration. So the larger meta comment for this is that whether it's like the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and other series of other US administrations, they have anti-Haitian reactions to Haitians, okay? So when it comes to Haitian migration to the United States, for example, it's treated in a manner that's wholly different than Cuban migration to the United States. Or even probably what we'll see is Ukrainian immigration to the United States. And it's racial. It has a racial basis to it. It's anti-Black and anti-Haitian. And we know this from what we saw, the images that came from the US-Mexico border in September 2021, when we saw a US Marshal bullwhipping a Haitian man with had bags of food that he got on the Mexico side. And this is an image that clearly resonates with a plantation context, right? There's a plantation context, and then the relations between people of African descent and people who of European descent who become racialized as Black and racialized as white, over centuries. But let me just read this because I had written down this fact. I want to make sure that I get this correct. So the Biden administration deported over 20,000 Haitians in his first year. And this is just shy of the total deported by the 3 previous presidents over 20 years. So this is more than Trump, who is overtly white supremacist, right? But many of us who exercised our right to vote, and thought that we're going to get a better situation coming out of this move towards autocracy that you saw within the Trump administration, that wasn't the case. And what's interesting about this is that 85% of these expulsions took place using Title 42 policies, which was a full public health order issued under the Trump administration, which expels Haitians without the possibility of asylum screenings. So usually when you come in as a refugee into the United States, you're allowed to have asylum screenings. But using Title 42, which was under the guise of COVID infections, it precluded the possibility to apply for asylum for all these people who are in situations of distress. And think about what these Haitians were leaving. They're leaving a country where if they were coming directly from Haiti to to Mexico, they were leaving Haiti where their president was assassinated, where there's still extreme poverty that's happening. They're also leaving Haiti after a second earthquake, the second major earthquake, which happened in the Lekai or Okai region, the southern part of Haiti. So the fact that you can have 20, think about the resources that need to be deployed to deport 20,000 people. 20,000 people instead of like admitting them into the United States and giving them a chance to become an American citizen or becoming a contributing member of the society. And then when you contrast that with like the Cuban migration to the United States, you know, Cubans fit the racial project of the United States, the racial whitening project of the United States in a better fashion than Haitians could ever do, you know? Even though you had this evidence of, you know, excuse me, Haitian households, you know, producing, you know, doctors, lawyers, things of that nature, professors, you know, as well. And what they end up doing in contributing to American society. I mean, you have to think about this critically. If you're not in Professor Sangpam's class or Professor Campbell's class or any of the other professors in AAS classes, and you're just reading this news, you're just like, that's pretty messed up. And you just go about your daily business. But you know, in these classes, this is where you get these tools to decipher not just, you know, the news or analyze the news in a critical fashion. You're analyzing the events so you can see, to give you a vocabulary. That's what you know, Black Studies has given me. Black Studies has given me a vocabulary to express oppression, to understand exploitation, and to also give me imagination to know that like things that like there can be better futures for Black people, not just Haitians. Okay, I know I'm Team Haiti. I wave my flag the way, you know, on the regular. But when it comes down to this, I have a deep love for Black people, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, the world tries to tell us there's something wrong with us as people of African descent on a daily, regular, normative basis. And I reject that. I reject that intellectually. Intellectually, I reject that. I reject that completely. And then, so by rejecting that and getting those ideas that are you're exposed to through some of these wonderful programs that Professor Campbell has enumerated this evening. You know, like my study abroad trip to Harare, as part of the pioneer group that went to Harare, Zimbabwe, to learn about Africa, to be in Africa for myself, to get away from the stereotypes about the African continent and see things for myself and to question those things. You can take advantage of those types of opportunities. I mean, by all means do so. Even if you don't even want to major in Black Studies, at least get the minor. The minor is going to help you to be more, well, I hope that, like, you know, by learning Black Studies, you can stand in the gap for Black folks wherever they need to be stood for. Whether you become a doctor, there's going to be some issue of medical racism that, like, your voice needs to stand up and say that, like, this is the way of this patient is being treated is wrong. You know, Black people do not have a higher tolerance for thresholds for pain as some doctors actually believe. That's what a Black Studies education will do for you. It'll help you think, to view Black people as fully human, to actually have them consider, to develop empathy for Black folks, to give you the courage that you need to stand up to, like, the daily inequities and the daily discrimination that happens. It helps you to be. It's helped me to be courageous. It helped me write what I write, and there's consequences for that. There's consequences for when you speak up about those types of issues, where you have to be prepared and learn more about, you know, how to react to those and how to navigate those different spaces.
Why don't we give Dr. Booth a chance to go eat and then come back?
Sure. Is there any food left? I see somebody coming in with a plate stacked up this high, like, dang, did you leave me any cabbage or anything? All right, I'll grab some. I don't really eat Jamaican food. This is good food.